Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished treating another injured miner. The attack on mining station Kepler 7 had been brutal. Pirates always targeted the outer rim stations because they were far from any real protection. Sarah had been working for 18 hours straight, patching up wounds and trying to save lives with whatever medical supplies she could find. The station's medical bay was a mess. Broken equipment lay scattered across the floor, and the smell of smoke still hung in the air. Sarah was the only doctor left on the station. The other medical staff had either been killed in the attack or evacuated on the first transport ship that came to help. She was cleaning her surgical tools when the communication system crackled to life. "Doc Chen, we found something weird out here," came the voice of Jake Martinez, one of the station's security officers. "There's a ship crashed about 2 kilometers from the station. It's not like anything I've ever seen." Sarah looked up from her work. "Is anyone alive?" "Don't know yet. The hull is made of some kind of metal that our scanners can't read through. We need to get inside to check. You should come with us in case there are survivors." Sarah grabbed her emergency medical kit and suited up. The asteroid's surface was rough and dangerous, covered in jagged rocks and deep craters. The emergency vehicle bounced and shook as they drove toward the crash site. When they arrived, Sarah stared at the wreckage in amazement. The ship was huge, easily 3 times the size of any human vessel she had seen. Its hull was a dark purple color that seemed to shift in the light. Strange symbols were carved into the metal, and parts of the ship were still glowing with an eerie blue light. "I've never seen anything like this," Jake said as they approached the main hull. "The design is completely alien. This isn't from any human colony. They found a breach in the hull where the ship had struck the asteroid. Inside, the corridors were tall and wide, clearly built for beings much larger than humans. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the air had a metallic taste that made Sarah's nose wrinkle." They moved deeper into the ship, calling out for survivors. Their voices echoed strangely in the alien corridors. After 20 minutes of searching, they found what looked like a command center. And there, lying unconscious near what must have been the captain's chair, was the first alien Sarah had ever seen. The creature was massive, at least 8 feet tall even lying down. Its skin was a pale blue-gray color, and it had 4 arms instead of 2. Its head was larger than a human's with 2 eyes that were closed now, but looked like they would be much bigger than human eyes. Strange ridges ran along its skull and its breathing was shallow and labored. "Is it alive?" Jake whispered, keeping his weapon ready. Sarah approached carefully. Her medical training kicked in, overriding her fear and amazement. She could see that the alien was badly injured. Dark blue blood seeped from several wounds and one of its arms was bent at an impossible angle. "It's dying," she said, kneeling beside the creature. She pulled out her medical scanner, but it couldn't make sense of the alien's biology. The readings were all over the place. She noticed something that looked like a badge or rank insignia on the alien's chest. It was made of the same glowing metal as parts of the ship, and the symbols on it were more complex than the others she had seen. This wasn't just any alien, this was someone important. "Doc, we should get out of here," Jake said nervously. "We don't know what this thing is or where it came from. It could be dangerous, but..." Sarah was already opening her medical kit. "It's hurt and dying. I took an oath to help anyone who needed medical care, regardless of who or what they are." The alien's breathing was getting weaker. Sarah had no idea how its internal organs worked, but she could see where it was losing blood. She started with the basics, stopping the bleeding and trying to stabilize what she assumed were vital signs. Working on an alien body was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. She couldn't use her usual techniques, so she had to improvise. Where human medicine would use one approach, she tried 3 different methods to see what worked. The alien's blood was thicker than human blood, and a strange dark blue color. It clotted differently, too. Sarah had to adjust her techniques using a combination of pressure bandages and a tissue bonding gel that seemed to work on alien skin. Hours passed as Sarah worked. Jake stayed to help, though he kept glancing nervously at the alien's weapons. The creature carried what looked like an energy rifle and several other devices that were clearly military equipment. "This is definitely a soldier," Jake observed. "Look at all this gear. And that symbol on its chest. I bet that means it's high-ranking." Sarah was too focused on her work to worry about what the alien was or why it was here. She managed to stop the bleeding and set the broken arm using a portable bone regeneration unit. The alien's bones were denser than human bones, but the device seemed to work. The hardest part was trying to figure out how to treat internal injuries she couldn't see or understand. Sarah used every trick she had learned in medical school and during her years treating injured miners. She gave the alien a mixture of universal antibiotics and painkillers, hoping they wouldn't be toxic to its system. As dawn broke over the asteroid, the alien's breathing finally began to stabilize. Its skin color improved from a sickly pale gray to a healthier blue-gray shade. Sarah sat back, exhausted but satisfied that she had done everything she could. "Will it live?" Jake asked. "I think so," Sarah said. "Its vital signs are getting stronger. Whatever species this is, they're tougher than they look." They moved the alien to the station's medical bay using an emergency transport stretcher. Sarah continued monitoring its condition, adjusting treatments as needed. She had no textbooks for alien medicine, so she had to learn as she went. 2 days later, the alien's eyes opened for the first time. They were large and golden, with pupils that contracted quickly in the medical bay's bright lights. The creature looked around in confusion before its gaze settled on Sarah. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then the alien tried to sit up, wincing in pain from its injuries. "Easy," Sarah said softly, gently pushing the alien back down onto the medical bed. "You're hurt pretty badly. You need to rest." The alien's golden eyes widened in what looked like surprise. It said something in a language Sarah had never heard, a series of deep rumbling sounds that seemed to come from deep in its chest. "I don't understand your language," Sarah said, "but you're safe here. I'm a doctor. I've been taking care of your injuries." The alien stared at her for another long moment, then looked down at its bandaged wounds. It flexed its repaired arm experimentally, then looked back at Sarah with what she could only describe as amazement. Later, Sarah would learn that she had just saved the life of General Zethkalar, one of the most feared military commanders in the Hegemony Empire. She would learn that humans were considered a primitive, worthless species by his people. She would learn that her simple act of medical compassion had just changed the course of galactic history. But for now, she was just a tired doctor who had saved a life, and that was enough. General Zethkalar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crimson blade staring out at the stars. 3 weeks had passed since his rescue from the mining station, but he could not forget the small human female who had saved his life. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she had done something that defied everything he had been taught about her species. The bridge crew moved around him with practiced efficiency, but Zethkalar noticed how they avoided making eye contact. Word of his rescue had spread quickly through the ship. A Hegemony general saved by a human. It was unthinkable. "General," came a voice behind him. Zethkalar turned to see Commander Vextar, his second-in-command, approaching with obvious reluctance. "What is it, Commander?" "High Command has responded to your incident report, sir. They want to see you immediately." Zethkalar had known this moment would come. The Hegemony's leadership would not ignore what had happened. In their eyes, he had been contaminated by contact with an inferior species. The fact that this contact had saved his life would not matter to them. The journey to High Command took 2 days. Zethkalar used the time to think about what he would tell the Council of Generals. How could he explain that a human had knowledge of medicine that exceeded their own? How could he make them understand that the small, fragile creature had shown him compassion without expecting anything in return? The High Command Station was a massive structure that housed the military leadership of the Hegemony Empire. Zethkalar had walked its corridors many times before, but now they felt different. The other officers he passed looked at him with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. The Council of Generals met in a circular chamber with seats arranged in rising tiers. 12 of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy sat in judgment. At the center was Supreme General Morthak, an ancient warrior whose scarred face told the story of 100 battles. "General Zethkalar," Morthak's voice rumbled through the chamber. "You stand accused of allowing yourself to be contaminated by contact with an inferior species. How do you answer?" Zethkalar stood straight, his forearms clasped behind his back in the traditional position of military attention. "I was dying, Supreme General. The human saved my life." "A human," spat General Krazix from the upper tier. "Those weak, pathetic creatures barely deserve to be called sentient. They have no technology, no military might, no culture worth preserving. How could such a being possibly save a Hegemony general?" "Because," Zethkalar said carefully, "their medicine is more advanced than we realized. The human doctor used techniques I had never seen before. She stopped bleeding that our own medics might not have been able to treat. She repaired damage to my internal organs using methods that seemed primitive, but were remarkably effective. The generals exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected to hear. Supreme General Morthak leaned forward. You are saying that humans possess medical knowledge superior to our own? I am saying that they approach medicine differently. While we focus on strength and endurance, they focus on healing and preservation of life. The human doctor treated me not because she expected payment or because I could benefit her. She treated me because I was injured and needed help. Impossible, declared General Vexthon. Inferior species do not act without selfish motivation. The human must have wanted something from you. No, Zethkalar said firmly. She asked for nothing. When I was strong enough to leave, she simply wished me well and returned to her work. She even gave me additional medical supplies in case I needed treatment during my journey home. The chamber fell silent. The concept of helping someone without expecting reward was foreign to the hegemony military culture. Strength was respected, weakness was despised, and every action was calculated for maximum personal benefit. This is clearly a case of contamination, General Krasix announced. The human has infected you with their weak philosophical ideas. You should be stripped of rank and sent for re-education. But Supreme General Morthak was studying Zethkalar with interest. Tell me more about these medical techniques. For the next hour, Zethkalar described everything he could remember about Sarah's treatment methods. He explained how she had adapted her tools to work on his alien physiology, how she had experimented with different approaches when her standard techniques didn't work, and how she had monitored his recovery with a dedication that impressed him. She worked for 3 days straight without sleep, he concluded. Her only concern was my survival. She showed a level of commitment to preserving life that I have never seen before, not even among our own medical staff. General Morthak was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. General Zethkalar, you will return to your command. However, you are forbidden from having any further contact with humans or their territory. Consider this your final warning. As Zethkalar left the chamber, he knew that the council had missed the point entirely. They saw Sarah's compassion as a weakness, but he had experienced it as a strength. She had saved his life not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to help an enemy. Back aboard his flagship, Zethkalar called his senior staff to a meeting. He looked at the faces of the officers who had served under him for years. I want a protective detail assigned to Mining Station Kepler 7, he announced. Commander Vextar looked confused. Sir, that's in human space. Why would we? Because there is a human doctor there who saved my life and she may be in danger because of it. If word spreads that humans helped a hegemony general, there will be those who want revenge. But sir, another officer protested, High Command specifically ordered you to avoid further human contact. Zethkalar's golden eyes hardened. High Command ordered me not to make contact. They said nothing about ensuring the safety of someone who showed mercy to a hegemony officer. We will maintain a protective watch from a distance. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared to challenge their general directly. That night, alone in his quarters, Zethkalar composed a message that he would never send. In it, he thanked Dr. Sarah Chen for showing him that strength and compassion were not opposites, but could exist together. He thanked her for treating him not as an enemy, but as a living being who needed help. He thought about the golden rule she had mentioned while treating him. Treat others as you would want to be treated. It was such a simple concept, but it contradicted everything the hegemony stood for. As he deleted the unsent message, Zethkalar made a decision that would change his life. He would find a way to repay the debt he owed to Sarah Chen, even if it meant defying High Command. And perhaps in time he could convince his own people that there was strength in showing mercy. The first seeds of change had been planted, though neither Sarah nor Zethkalar yet understood how far those seeds would grow. The story of the human doctor and the hegemony general spread through the galaxy like wildfire, though not through official channels. In the dark corners of space stations, in the hidden meeting places of rebels, and in the quiet conversations between oppressed peoples, word traveled about something unprecedented. A human had saved a hegemony officer's life, and that officer had protected her in return. Dr. Sarah Chen had no idea she had become a symbol. She continued her work at Mining Station Kepler 7, treating injured miners and maintaining the small medical facility. The only change she noticed was that fewer pirates attacked their sector, though she didn't know why. What she didn't know was that General Zethkeller's ships patrolled the area regularly, keeping potential threats away from the station. The general had kept his word about protecting her, even though it meant defying High Command's orders. 3 months after the rescue, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. She was working late in the medical bay when Jake Martinez burst through the door, his face pale with excitement and fear. "Doc, you need to see this," he said, gesturing toward the docking bay. "We've got company and they're not human." Sarah followed Jake to the observation deck overlooking the docking bay. A sleek ship unlike any she had seen before was carefully docking with the station. It was smaller than the general's crashed vessel, but clearly built by the same advanced technology. "Should I call for help?" Jake asked, his hand moving toward the emergency alert button. "Wait," Sarah said, studying the ship. Something about its approach seemed peaceful. "They're being careful not to damage the station. If they meant us harm, they wouldn't bother with such gentle docking procedures." The ship's airlock connected with the station's, and after several tense minutes, 3 figures emerged. They were clearly not human, but they were also not like General Zethkelar. These beings were smaller, with green-tinted skin and large, expressive eyes. They moved carefully, their hands visible and empty of weapons. The leader of the group approached Sarah and Jake slowly. When it spoke, its voice was soft and melodic, with only a slight accent as it used what sounded like carefully learned human words. "Dr. Sarah Chen," the being asked. "We are looking for the human doctor who saved the hegemony general." Sarah stepped forward, her heart racing but her voice steady. "I'm Dr. Chen, who are you?" "My name is Felani," the being replied with what looked like a bow. "I represent the Verdani Republic. We have traveled far to meet you." Over the next several hours, Sarah learned things about the galaxy that shocked her. The Hegemony Empire, it turned out, controlled most of known space through fear and military might. Dozens of species had been conquered or forced into submission. The Verdani were one of several species that maintained independence only through constant vigilance and careful diplomacy. For generations, the hegemony has told us that mercy is weakness, Felani explained as they sat in the station's small conference room. They teach their children that compassion is a disease that must be eliminated. But you showed mercy to one of their generals, and instead of destroying you, he chose to protect you. This changes everything. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "I just did what any doctor would do. I helped someone who was hurt." "That is exactly the point," said another Verdani whose name Sarah learned was Mortel. "What you call normal behavior, the hegemony calls impossible. You have proven that their basic philosophy is wrong." The Verdani explained that news of the rescue had spread through underground networks across the galaxy. Oppressed peoples everywhere were talking about the human doctor who showed kindness to an enemy and the hegemony general who chose honor over orders. "We want to learn from you," Felani said. "Not just your medical techniques, but your approach to healing. The hegemony focuses on making soldiers stronger and more resistant to damage. You focus on actually healing the damage. This is revolutionary." Sarah found herself at the center of something much larger than she had ever imagined. The Verdani proposed an alliance, not military but medical and philosophical. They wanted human doctors to teach their medical staff about compassion-based healing. In return, they would share advanced medical technology and help spread human medical knowledge to other species. But the galaxy was watching, and not everyone approved of these developments. Deep in hegemony space, Supreme General Morthak convened an emergency session of the High Council. The chamber was filled with angry voices as reports came in from across the galaxy. "The infection is spreading," General Krazix announced. 3 separate species have made contact with human colonies, asking about their medical practices. The Verdani have established a formal embassy in human space. This cannot be allowed to continue. General Zethkelar has disobeyed direct orders, another general added. Our intelligence reports show his ships in human territory, allegedly providing protection to the doctor who contaminated him. Supreme General Morthak's scarred face was grim. "The situation is worse than we thought. If other species begin adopting human philosophies, it could undermine the very foundation of our authority. Then we destroy them," General Krazix said simply. "We eliminate the human colonies before this infection can spread further. One massive strike will end this threat permanently." But not all the generals agreed. The humans have done nothing aggressive, argued General Vexthon. If we attack them without provocation, we risk turning them into martyrs. The other species might unite against us. Let them try, Krasik sneered. No alliance of inferior species can stand against the might of the hegemony. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Supreme General Morthak called for order. We will not act hastily, he decided, but we will prepare. General Krasik, you will assemble a strike force. If the human infection continues to spread, we may have no choice but to eliminate it at its source. Back at mining station Kepler-7, Sarah was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Representatives from 4 different species had made contact, all asking about human medical practices and philosophy. The station's small communication array was overwhelmed with messages from across the galaxy. I'm just a doctor, Sarah told Filani during one of their conversations. I never intended to start some kind of galactic revolution. The greatest changes often begin with simple acts of kindness, the Verdani replied. You treated a patient. That patient chose to honor his debt to you. Now others want to understand how such things are possible. Unknown to Sarah, General Zethkalar was facing his own crisis. His protective patrols around human space had been noticed by High Command. He had been ordered to return to hegemony space immediately to face charges of insubordination. As his flagship prepared to depart, Zethkalar made one final decision. He sent a coded message to the Verdani embassy, warning them that a strike force was being assembled against human colonies. He had no proof, but his instincts told him that hardliners in the hegemony would not tolerate the growing influence of human philosophy. The message was brief. Storm clouds gather. Protect what you value. With that warning sent, General Zethkalar ordered his ships to return to hegemony space. He had done what he could to repay his debt to Dr. Sarah Chen. Now he would face the consequences of his choices. The galaxy held its breath as 2 very different philosophies prepared to collide. On one side stood the hegemony's belief in strength through dominance and fear. On the other stood humanity's simple conviction that helping others was the right thing to do. Neither side yet understood that this conflict would reshape the very nature of galactic civilization. The warning came just in time. General Zethkalar's coded message reached the Verdani embassy 3 days before the hegemony strike force launched their attack on human space. What followed was a scramble of desperate preparation that would determine the fate of an entire philosophy. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the emergency command center that had been hastily set up in mining station Kepler-7's main conference room. Around her, representatives from 6 different alien species worked frantically to coordinate a response to the incoming threat. How many ships are they sending? Asked Commander Torres, the highest-ranking human military officer in the sector. Filani, the Verdani representative, checked her communication device with trembling hands. Our sources report at least 50 hegemony warships led by General Krasik himself. They will reach the outer human colonies in 2 days. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. This was all her fault. Her simple act of saving a life had somehow led to a war that could destroy everything humanity had built in this part of the galaxy. I should surrender myself to them, she said quietly. If they want me, maybe they'll leave the colonies alone. No, said a deep, familiar voice from the communication array. Sarah's heart jumped as she recognized the voice of General Zethkalar. Dr. Chen, if you can hear this, do not consider surrendering. Krasik will not stop with you. He sees human philosophy as a disease that must be completely eliminated. The room fell silent as the general's message continued. I am broadcasting this from hegemony space, where I am currently under arrest for treason. But I have something important to tell you all. The hegemony is not as united as they appear. Many of us have grown tired of ruling through fear alone. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. The communication array lit up with incoming messages from across hegemony space. One by one, other hegemony officers began broadcasting their own messages of support. This is Commander Veltoth of the 4th Fleet. I stand with General Zethkalar. This is Captain Morduk of the heavy cruiser Ironheart. The human doctor's compassion has shown us a better way. This is Admiral Kexvar of the 7th Battle Group. We refuse to participate in the extermination of a peaceful species. Sarah watched in amazement as the reports came in. Nearly a third of the hegemony military was refusing to join the attack on human space. Some were even moving their ships to intercept the strike force. But the most shocking development came when General Zethkalar himself arrived at the station. His ship, the Crimson Blade, dropped out of hyperspace just hours before Krazix's strike force was due to arrive. But he was not alone. Behind his flagship came a fleet of 30 hegemony vessels, all bearing the crews who had chosen to side with him. Sarah met the general in the docking bay, just as she had when he was dying from his injuries months earlier. But this time, he stood tall and strong, his forearms crossed in what she had learned was a gesture of respect among his people. "Dr. Chen," he said, his deep voice carrying across the docking bay, "I have come to repay my debt to you." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah replied. "I was just doing my job." "That is exactly why I owe you everything," Zethkalar said. "You showed me that doing one's job with compassion and honor is more important than following orders without question." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. The combined fleet of humans, Verdani, and rebel hegemony forces worked together to establish defensive positions around the human colonies. Sarah found herself coordinating medical support for all three species, using the techniques she had developed while treating the general. When Krazix's strike force finally arrived, they found not the helpless human settlements they expected, but a united defense force ready to fight for something greater than territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to choose compassion over cruelty. The battle that followed would be remembered as the first engagement of the Galactic Civil War. But it was not won through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. It was won through something the hegemony had never encountered before: enemies who were willing to risk their lives to protect each other. During the fiercest part of the fighting, Sarah watched from the medical bay as hegemony ships that had been enemies for generations worked together to protect human colonies. Verdani medical ships moved between the battle lines, treating wounded from all sides. Even some of Krazix's own crews began to question what they were fighting for. The turning point came when General Krazix's flagship was damaged by rebel hegemony forces. As the ship lost power and began drifting helplessly, Sarah made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "I'm taking a medical shuttle to help the wounded on that ship," she announced. "Are you insane?" Commander Torres demanded. "That's the enemy flagship. They'll kill you the moment you board." "Maybe," Sarah said, gathering her medical supplies, "but there are injured people on that ship who need help. That's more important than who they work for." General Zethkalar stepped forward. "Then I will escort you myself." Together, the human doctor and the rebel hegemony general flew across the battlefield to the damaged enemy ship. They found General Krazix himself badly wounded in the command center, abandoned by his own crew who had evacuated to other ships. Sarah knelt beside the general who had ordered her destruction and began treating his injuries. Krazix's golden eyes stared at her in confusion and disbelief. "Why?" he whispered through his pain. "Why help your enemy?" "Because you're hurt," Sarah said simply, working to stop the bleeding from his wounds. "And because maybe if I help you, you'll understand that we're not really enemies." For the first time in his long military career, General Krazix found himself speechless. The small human female was risking her life to save him, the very being who had come to destroy her people. It made no tactical sense, served no strategic purpose, and gained her nothing. And yet as Sarah's gentle hands worked to heal his wounds, Krazix began to understand what General Zethkalar had discovered months earlier. There was a strength and compassion that no military doctrine had ever taught him. When the medical shuttle returned to the station, it carried not just the wounded General Krazix, but news that would change everything. The enemy strike force was standing down, faced with the inexplicable sight of their target saving their commander's life. The attacking forces had lost the will to continue the assault, but more than that, word of what had happened was already spreading across hegemony space. The image of Dr. Sarah Chen, treating the very general who had come to kill her, was being broadcast on every communication frequency. Across the Empire, citizens and soldiers alike were asking the same question that Krazix had asked: "Why help your enemy?" As Sarah worked through the night treating wounded from both sides of the battle, she had no way of knowing that her simple act of compassion had just split the hegemony empire in half. On hundreds of worlds, people were beginning to question whether ruling through fear was really the only way. The civil war that would reshape the galaxy had begun, not with a declaration or a battle cry, but with a human doctor kneeling beside a wounded enemy and saying, "Because you're hurt." 5 years had passed since the battle that changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the great assembly hall of the rebuilt Galactic Congress, looking out at a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just a few years earlier. In the audience sat representatives from over 40 species, including both factions of what had once been the unified hegemony empire. The Progressive Hegemony Alliance, led by General Zeth Kalar, sat alongside former enemies like the Verdani Republic and the Human Colonial Administration. Even more remarkable, scattered throughout the assembly were members of the old purist hegemony, the hardline faction that had once sought to destroy everything Sarah represented. Sarah had changed too. No longer just a mining station doctor, she now held the title of Director of Interspecies Medical Exchange, a position that made her one of the most influential beings in the galaxy. But she still wore her simple medical coat and carried the same battered medical bag that had held the supplies she used to save General Zeth Kalar so long ago. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all species," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation systems. "5 years ago, I was just a doctor doing my job. Today, we gather to celebrate something that seemed impossible then, the graduation of the first class of the Galactic Medical Corps." The applause that followed was thunderous. In the front rows sat 30 medical students representing 15 different species. They wore matching uniforms bearing the symbol that had become known throughout the galaxy, a pair of gentle hands surrounding a star, representing the idea that healing could bring unity to the cosmos. Among the graduates, Sarah could see the faces that told the story of how far they had all come. There was Velani, the young Verdani who had been inspired by Sarah's treatment of General Krasix to become a doctor herself. Beside her sat Morketh, a former hegemony soldier who had laid down his weapons to pick up medical instruments after witnessing the battle at mining station Kepler 7. Most remarkable of all was Kraseth, the youngest son of General Krasix himself. The old general had never fully accepted the new way of thinking, but he had allowed his son to study human medical techniques. Perhaps, he had told Sarah during their last meeting, the young can learn things that the old cannot. As Sarah continued her speech, she reflected on how the galaxy had changed. The civil war that followed the failed attack on human space had lasted 3 bloody years, but it had ended not with one side destroying the other, but with a negotiated peace that recognized both philosophies had value. The Progressive Hegemony Alliance had embraced human ideas about compassion and cooperation while maintaining their proud military traditions. They had become the galaxy's primary peacekeeping force, protecting smaller species from pirates and other threats. General Zeth Kalar, now holding the title of Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, had transformed from a conqueror into a protector. The purist hegemony had retreated to their core worlds, maintaining their traditional ways but no longer seeking to impose them on others. They had even grudgingly begun to accept medical aid from the Galactic Medical Corps when their own people needed help that their doctors couldn't provide. "The students graduating today represent something new in our galaxy," Sarah continued. "They have learned not just how to heal bodies, but how to heal the divisions between species. They understand that true strength comes not from the ability to cause harm, but from the willingness to prevent it." In the audience, General Zeth Kalar listened with pride. The human doctor who had saved his life had done more than heal his wounds. She had shown him and countless others that there was a better way to live than in constant conflict. Beside him sat Admiral Falani of the Verdani Republic, now serving as the diplomatic liaison between the various alliance members. Her people had become the galaxy's primary negotiators, using lessons learned from human conflict resolution techniques to prevent wars before they started. As the ceremony continued, Sarah called each graduate to the stage to receive their commission in the Galactic Medical Corps. Each one pledged the same oath that Sarah had taken so many years ago, with one addition that had been suggested by General Zeth Kalar himself. "I will treat all beings with compassion, regardless of species, faction, or past conflicts." After the formal ceremony, Sarah found herself in the reception hall, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy who had come to honor the graduates. She was speaking with a group of young purist hegemony observers when an aide approached with urgent news. "Director Chen," the aide said quietly, "we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim. There's been a plague outbreak on 3 purest hegemony worlds. Their medical facilities can't handle it, but they're too proud to officially request help. Sarah nodded, already knowing what needed to be done. Prepare a medical response team. Include volunteers from all factions, but make sure we have some purest heritage personnel who can communicate with the local populations. Ma'am, the aide hesitated. The purest government hasn't authorized our intervention. Technically, we'd be entering their space without permission. Sarah smiled, remembering a conversation she'd had with General Zeth Kalar years earlier. Sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring politics. We'll deal with the consequences later. 6 hours later, a fleet of medical ships was heading toward purest space, led by Sarah herself. The response team included graduates from the ceremony, veteran corps members, and volunteers from a dozen different species. Even some progressive hegemony military ships had joined the mission, ready to provide protection if needed. When they arrived at the plague-stricken worlds, they found a situation worse than anyone had imagined. Entire cities were under quarantine, and the purest medical system was completely overwhelmed. Local officials initially refused to allow the relief ships to land, but when children started dying in the hospitals, pride gave way to desperation. Sarah worked alongside her team for 2 weeks straight, treating patients and training local medical staff in advanced treatment techniques. It was exhausting work, made more difficult by the language barriers and cultural differences. But slowly, the outbreak was brought under control. On the final day of the mission, as the medical ships prepared to leave, an unexpected visitor arrived at the main hospital where Sarah was working. General Krazix himself, now an old and scarred veteran, walked slowly through the corridors where human doctors were treating his people. "Dr. Chen," he said when he found her treating a young purist child. "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked up from her patient. "For what, General?" "5 years ago I came to your space to destroy you because I believed you were weak. I was wrong. You have shown a strength that I never understood." He paused, watching as Sarah gently adjusted the child's IV drip. "You came here to help us even though we have never been anything but hostile to you. Why?" Sarah gave the same answer she had given 5 years earlier when treating the general's own wounds. "Because you needed help." The old general nodded slowly. Perhaps my son was right to study your methods. Perhaps there is wisdom in what you humans call compassion." As the medical fleet departed from purest space, Sarah received word that would mark another milestone in galactic history. The purest hegemony government had officially requested to send observers to the next Galactic Medical Corps training program. It was a small step, but Sarah had learned that small steps could lead to great changes. Standing on the bridge of her medical ship, watching the stars stream past, she thought about the long journey that had brought them all to this point. It had started with a simple choice: help someone who was hurt, regardless of who they were or what they represented. That choice had rippled outward like waves in a pond, changing minds, ending wars, and creating possibilities that no one could have imagined. The galaxy was far from perfect. There were still conflicts, still species that remained suspicious of each other, still those who believed that strength could only come from dominance over others. But there was also something new: hope that things could be different. As her ship set course for the next world that needed help, Dr. Sarah Chen smiled. She was still just a doctor doing her job, but sometimes she had learned that was enough to change the universe.